Hello, and welcome to an Unconventional Guide to Success, where we are exploring concepts and discussing real life examples showing that the path isn't linear and the journey to success is self defined. My name is Linda Misegadis,
And I'm Scott Montgomery.
and we will be your guides. And in your book, there's a quote that you have in there, and I'm gonna, I can't remember who said this, but you're talking about compassion and communication, and you say compassion starts with empathy and that turns outward with an intent to help. With compassion, leaders make the conscious choice to turn emotion into action. And in doing so, compassionate leaders are perceived as stronger and more competent, able to make decisions and get things done. And compassion in an organization triggers other positive outcomes, improve collaboration, trust, and team loyalty. So talk a little bit about compassion and communication. Like, why did you feel like that was an important quote to kind of put in thinking about this?
Well, it's really timely to the last thing we just talked about making choices, right? So in leadership and a lot of what we talk about is applied to business, but and then kind of rolls into family. Jim's your husband, Caitlin's my wife. They're also Caitlin's my partner in business. Anyway, I think it's an interest. Compassion to me, and the way it's been defined is learned, and empathy is reflexive, and compassion is reflective. Very different.
Interesting.
And being that compassion is reflective, you get to create a choice, and you can learn and sort of expand on your compassion, like you just described, like we're talking about making a choice.
Right.
With empathy, it's being reflexive. It's also sort of that back to the amygdala and the science of it all. And when you have empathy, it's sort of inherent. And it's sort of what you want to do with your, empathy. But one is sort of inherent and one is sort of learned. And
that makes sense.
And I think when you're making choices in business, I don't know where to even run with that for you or for us or for our viewers in the notion only that compassion is really important to bring to your leadership style. And it ties back to what you should always bring to communication. You have a choice. Yeah. You have a choice because there are people that are going to come to you that are ill-intended. I'm not saying everything's rosy and everybody's always pleasant, but then there's an option, and a compassionate response to that could be equally as ill-intended intentionally, or it could be, I'm going to address this differently and the communication is going to be more productive.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, and that's a good lead into my next question that I was going to talk a little bit about is tone. Tone in communication is also really important, right? And I recognize it more and more. Again, terrible at it, but I recognize it. So I figure that's a step in the right direction. Is that because, again, Jim, who is unfortunately the receiver of my negative tone most of the time,
Jim.
he will make, I know, poor Jim. He will say, and I've started to pay more attention to it, like how I speak to people on the phone or people at work. I actually show them probably more compassion and empathy and understanding than when I'm talking to Jim. And I don't necessarily know why that is as far as how my brain is wired, but I am starting to recognize more and more in things that I hadn't seen in the past, so if you stop and listen to yourself and hear what you're saying, and recognize that, again, that whole ill intent, or why is a question being asked, or what's the situation, or why do I choose to have a negative tone, or snap at a question or something. And so I do think that, that's an interesting, piece in all of this. And what are what are your thoughts around that whole tone situation?
Yeah, so I started running around in my mind a couple of things that I also do when I communicate with people, and I'm trying more and more to be more vulnerable in my approach. And I even did it with you yesterday when I sent an email and said, listen, I'm asking a question here, and it could be misinterpreted as something that's a demand of me, but really I'm just trying to partner. And I really want you to know my curiosity is to better the process. And I felt good about my email, and I knew by the time you got to those words, you actually knew what I was trying to convey, right?
Yes, 100%.
So that's a solutioning to when you're not in the room with someone. Maybe say exactly what you mean and be vulnerable to, the I love you at the end. because that's going to
Yeah.
set the tone to be productive.
Yeah.
Tone to me automatically brings up also sort of body language, right? So we've got two things going on
Mm-hmm.
here. I talk to think, and I'm a high energy, high D, passionate, sort of loud guy.
Right.
If I'm talking to my wife about something that's super serious and I'm processing it out loud and I get louder, she's going on guard saying, "Why are you yelling at me?
Right.
What the hell
Yes.
is going on here?" And
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
learning, and it's a hard one for me to learn. Whoa, I just need to bring it down. I need to dial it down just a notch, because this was
Sure.
not, my tone was not directed at her. My tone was directed at the intensity of what I was processing out loud with her.
Yes, yes. I totally get that. And I know what you mean, because I've had that happen before myself, where if I get escalated, I'm not angry. I'm just passionate about it. So I'm like, it comes across. And because I guess I'm so mild most of the time, that
Yeah.
then when I do, it looks like, holy cow, take
What's
a
happening?
step back. What is wrong with you? Why are you? So it could, the opposite can happen, where you're very high energy most of the time anyway, and then you take it up an even higher notch,
It's
and
too
then
much.
it's like, then it's like, holy cow, I can't. And now I really do think that maybe you're angry with me. So I could see that, definitely. I think that's really important in what I'm curious to. So the other thing that's so critical in all of that, where this kind of feeds into with things like the nonverbal, so the body language we talked a little bit about,
Yeah.
and then also how important the feedback loop is. I think, one of the things that I think is important, and this all ties to the whole thing around partnerships, relationships, it comes with trust as well, right? So in order to take, maybe to even give and receive feedback, there's a level of trust in all of that as well. But what are your thoughts when it comes to the feedback loop?
So a couple things for me. I wanted to finish on body language too, because if our viewers are benefiting from what we've learned in our career decades,
Yeah.
and what we're trying to share, what I'm trying to share in the book, and what we're trying to do here, body language is something I'm really wanting to emphasize for the next generation. As a father of 3 kids, and as a guy who employs a lot of emerging Gen Xers, or the next gen, I don't even know what gen it is, but the guys that
Yes.
are still trying to figure it out, bringing a notebook to a meeting, aiming their body my way, crossing their legs and pointing their toe my way, making eye contact.
Yeah, eye contact's big to me too.
Yeah, and simmer and hold yourself solid are things
Yeah.
that I've watched a million people come into my office, slouch over, sit down without a notebook, chomping on gum, and expect me to
Yeah.
take them seriously. And I'm
Yeah.
looking at them going, and also, I think there's an elegance that comes of that, not an old school style of you need to be sitting prim and proper for me.
Yes. Yeah. I get that.
What you're relaying to me becomes more effective because I'm not distracted by your gum chomping.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's true. Yeah.
And I think it's really important to talk about, right? Like, so we talked about communication and emailing, and how the written word goes, tone and tenor of how you're actually speaking with someone, and then how you're
Right.
actually facing them and engaging them, perhaps touching them to keep and get their attention, or
Yeah.
transfer warm intent, you know?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And so these things are really important. And I also know in today's society, don't touch me. I get it.
Yeah. I know. It's much different. Yeah. It's like 6 feet, please. Yeah.
Yeah. But the last thing you asked about is feedback. So for an example, when I'm not getting clear communication from someone, the way I offer feedback is to offer further inquiry and slow myself down even more. Help me understand.
Yeah.
Take a minute to think about how you're relaying information, and let me then offer my feedback against what I truly understand you to be saying is really important than trying to just jam answers in and think you know everything. And I also struggle with that, because I do tend to surround myself with, I know what's coming. And I don't always know what's coming because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Yes. No.
But I think feedback is important. And I also think that that's one of the reasons I got my coaching certification. It taught me all the components of your amygdala hijack, how to communicate effectively, how to listen more effectively, and then how to package all of that. And I think
Yeah.
coaching people who need help doing that is my response to your question.
No, I think that's a great response. And I think for me as well is learning some of those tips and tricks on, repeat back what you heard so
Mhm.
that if you're unsure, get clarification. Because again, we sometimes make assumptions about what we think we heard or what we believe the person has said. And then sometimes we twist the intention in our
Yeah.
head, right?
Yes.
So now we've like heard it and now we've assumed that this is what your intention is, even though that's not even what was said.
Can be
I
true.
have now determined that that's what your intention is. And therefore
Right.
now, no matter what you say, I'm like, nope, I can't hear it anymore kind of thing. So
Right. I was talking
yeah,
to someone the other day. I was talking to a friend of mine about how he was comparing himself to a generation of minority handicapped people. And I was explaining to him he needed to be careful in doing that because he's never going to be a minority. So
yeah,
be careful that how you communicate that they're teaching you a lesson because
yes,
you feel like you're one of them. And
yes,
I was so adamant to say to him in my communication, just be careful. I'm looking out for you.
right,
I've learned that when I talk to women, I might have a perspective, but I'm never going to be a woman, so I can't tell them what they're feeling.
right, yeah,
He was so hung up on what he was trying to do in that intention, he couldn't hear what I was saying.
yes,
And I
yeah,
realized at that moment, I had to say to him, it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it.
100%.
My communication got clearer and more focused, and a light bulb went off for him. And
That's good.
there was no ill intention, but there was a slippery intersection of a fight headed our way.
Well, and sometimes that can be the end of a friendship,
Yeah, exactly.
or at least a pause. I remember during the, you used to, well, I was like, say, don't talk about politics or religion because those can be friend breakers. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
and there have been a lot of times throughout the years where you're right in those situations. If you don't, so the fact that you were aware enough to recognize that you were heading down a path, it was good because sometimes that is, you've got to stop for a minute and say, how this person is receiving this information is not how I'm intending for it to be received. And so can I take a pause here and maybe redirect a little bit?
Yes.
So, that's pretty insightful on your part to take that approach, honestly.
Well, and I think that's important to say because that's what we're trying to share here on our podcast is take a minute. You don't get to fix this by jamming it through. Take a minute, do your Myers-Briggs assessments, do your DISC assessment, be self-aware, practice what you preach. You and I have been doing this for 35 years.
Yes.
I'm only trying to introduce this to the early generation headed in because
100%.
they have 35 years to master this. I just want to create an awareness for them.
Yes, I totally agree. Well, and I think that's probably even more important today because so much of how communication happens, you were talking a little bit about how you communicate with your kids through social media. A lot of communication that happens with the generations today is via social media or
Text.
it's how they're, and again, not understanding, like even maybe with the best of intentions, but a lot of people, they leave very negative comments or they decide, maybe I see this happen frequently where somebody will post something that is important to them. And instead of just allowing them to be in that moment, because we do use these social media platforms, and so allow them to be in that moment and feel the way that they do, somebody then feels compelled to come in and then comment or school that person or try to educate or redirect that person. And I just think, one, it's inappropriate. And two, you have no idea what that person feels or what they're going through. And so it's really not your place. And you could make the argument if you put yourself out there in social media world, then you are automatically subjected to that. But I don't believe that because we live in a world where so much of how people project themselves now is through social media
and
platforms.
Polished. And it's polished social media platforms.
Yes, exactly. Very much so. So I think that also is a very slippery slope and has impacted communication because I think that's a big part of what's happening today is why so much miscommunication happens is because we're making assumptions based on what we believe the situation is or how we're interpreting the situation.
So here comes listening. in our communication.
Yes, yes.
Listening is a
so
very,
important.
very big component, and active listening versus passive listening. And there's so many different ways to
Yes.
listen. And who knew, right?
Right. Yeah.
I
No,
just
it's
thought
so
I had
true.
two ears. Yeah.
Well, and I had to learn this because this was again a growth thing, is that listen with the intent to hear, not with the intent to respond. Right.
Right.
And that was a big growth thing for me, because I will admit I was listening with the intent to respond oftentimes because it was so important for me to get my point across or to say what I wanted to say, that I was no longer hearing what the person was saying. I was just
Right.
listening to that break when I could then say what I wanted to say, type of thing. And so I agree. It's really important.
Well, how key is that, Linda? I mean, and also, isn't your life richer because you're actually relaying information that's got effective use and not just responding to nonsense? Right?
Yes. Yes.
So true.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. And I love that we're able to get into that dialogue, because there's 1,000 scenarios every day. And also, I still talk to hear myself talk sometimes.
Yeah.
It's never ending.
Well, and I still listen with the intention to respond sometimes, because it's like,
Let's
if
be
I really
human.
want to, it's like, I just kind of admit that that is definitely a part of who I am. So, well, I think, kind of maybe a good way to wrap up our session on communication is one of the things that you put in the book as well is about asking questions and how important it is to ask open-ended how, when, and what communications when communicating with someone. So I'm wondering if you could just maybe leave everybody with like an example of a situation where you might apply that type of approach.
I think what's really important here, and I learned it early on in my career, to answer your question about, how to inquire and ask questions and keep the communication fluid and flowing and on point. My personal preference, again, practicing this for 20 years from someone who taught it to me before ever even thinking about writing a book about it, was help me understand. And when the hows and the whats and the whys are implied, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm not clear or I want to engage in deeper dialogue, I will, in any topic, say, help me understand. Whether that's help me understand more, help me understand deeper, help me understand tactically. Yeah. But I feel like that's such a great way for people to take the pause and move the conversation back to the relayer of information. Help me understand. And so I think the who's and the what's and the whys and all that are in the book. And I'm sure there's pages, and I know there are pages around how to communicate more effectively. But for me, that's a really good reset that's always appropriate.
No, I love it. I think it's a great way to leave communication. We hope you enjoyed this episode of An Unconventional Guide to Success. In each episode, Scott and I will share experiences and relationships that have shaped us. Our next episode is all about leadership. Leadership is not about titles, positions, or flowcharts. It is about one life influencing another. John Maxwell. An Unconventional Guide to Success is an inspirational, motivated series hosted by Scott Montgomery and Linda Misegadis, recorded on Riverside.fm. Music, editing, and production by Logan Misegadis. Check out Scott Montgomery's new book, How Did You Get Here, and all the helpful related materials at www.howdidyouggethere.com. Thank you for joining us on our journey. If you would like to reach out to us, our contact information is in the show notes.